Hey everybody, Miranda here. I wanted to come on and talk a little bit about some ancient texts that I have been reading and studying and I find very interesting. That would be the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jubilees, and Jasher, among others. But it would be too long of a video to talk about all of them. But I just wanted to mention a few. So in my videos that I've been doing on YouTube, I've started, from the beginning, explaining the creation of the supernatural realm and the creation of time, matter, space, all the things, the material world that we now live in. Where did it come from? Actually, we discovered it came from the invisible. God created the invisible, and then everything that is made visible was created from unseen realm, from the unseen things. So we talked about how the two realms worked together, and how, the author of the supernatural, everybody's into the supernatural, everybody's into an enlightenment journey, a spiritual journey. Well, that comes from, you being created from God the Father, and, coming into this realm. And so that desire is in you because you are a spiritual being first and foremost. And so a lot of people, even Christians, neglect their spirit being, which is, who they are, their identity. And then they have a soul and they live in a body, and the soul and the body is used to connect, is used to, be in this physical realm, but then also still operate in the supernatural. We were meant to operate in both realms. And so then we went through the process of who Satan is, who is Lucifer, who is Hillel, who is this being, that's created, that tempted Adam and Eve, where Adam and Eve gave up their power and their authority to Satan. And then how that was the origin of the fall of, human suffering, and why we go through everything that we go through in this realm, and how it became fallen, and how it's gradually progressed further away from what God originally designed it to be. And that's so important as a Christian, and even as an unbeliever, to understand the origin of bad, of these fallen things that we deal with. And, we need to understand our enemy and who he was. So you can go back and watch those videos that he was an ancient cherub. He wasn't an angel, an archangel. He was a cherub. He was a being, and, what he was over and what he did. And we, discussed that he was over sanctuaries, and he was over other beings and other angelic beings in heaven, and how he was able to convince some of these angelic beings to follow him. They were following orders. He was their commander, in whatever area that they were. And so Enoch, even though the Bible explains this, Enoch and some of these ancient texts are really great because they give context to some of the things that are talked about in the Bible. And it is my opinion that Enoch and some of these ancient texts are a vital part of history that we should study, and it really helps us connect and actually understand the Old Testament. Going back and reading the Old Testament, to me, is actually super fascinating because of this knowledge that I have now gained from these ancient texts. So a lot of people have issues with these ancient texts, well, they're not a part of the canon, they're not inspired scripture, and I'm not here to say that they are inspired scripture, but if you don't want to think of it as scripture, that's fine, but think of it as valuable history. How we can, we read and study a book, and we can Google things, and we can pull out history books. And so a lot of this is historical. It's not only captured in these ancient texts, but there's other history books and ancient cultures that actually tell of the same story. So it's important to understand what the story is, because it's literally the foundation for all cultural, spiritual practices. And if you can understand this, it will help you perceive and put a biblical lens on all the different cultures, all the different religions, and all the different spiritual quests that man has been on since the foundation of the world. So again, if you don't want to look at it as scripture, then look at it as a history book. Look at it as history. And just on that note, the Ethiopian Jews actually considered this to be inspired. They consider the Book of Jubilees, Jasher, and Enoch to be inspired scripture. And to them, it was once part of their holy scriptures. But again, it fills in a lot of gaps in history. For example, some of how vital this history is. Think about the Book of Enoch. It was written in the days of Jared, And Jared is Enoch's father. He's the great-grandson of Adam and the great-grandfather of Noah. So if you're reading the book of Enoch, if you have it, think about how this text is something that was written when Adam was still alive. The very first man that ever walked the earth, this book was written while he was still walking the earth. So, you know, just to hold that book in your hand and think, wow, like this was written, this was an account of what happened when Adam was still alive. I mean, that's just a great historical, you know, piece of work to have. And I just think that that's awesome. So the story in the book is essential to understanding the Old Testament. Without this text, in my opinion, it would be hard to understand some of the Old Testament concepts. So, you know, Enoch is separated in several parts. The first part tells the story of certain angels that followed Satan in rebellion to God. These are referred to as the Watchers, and it names as some 20 angels and what they did and what they specifically taught mankind to do. And these things that they taught mankind to do weren't to better man, weren't to aid into our spiritual enlightenment, weren't to progress us into something, you know, that God was holding back us from. Everything that they taught mankind are the exact same things that man is falling prey to today, thinking that it will better their consciousness, thinking that it will enlighten them, thinking that they will progress spiritually. All these concepts come from the fallen angels and what they taught mankind to do. So it tells of several angels that fell, but it names 20 of them and what they taught mankind to pervert creation. The offspring of this perversion would be the giants or the Nephilim. According to Enoch, I'm not going to read, you know, the transcripts, but according to Enoch, the things listed that the fallen angels taught mankind, just a summary, is weapon making and warfare, makeup and jewelry, introduced them to psychedelic drugs, vampirism, enchantments, cursing, astrology, all of the magic and the witchcraft and the things that are very prevalent today. The angels are even, they even taught mankind the art of abortion. So a lot of the things that we think that we're fighting today, were things that were going on from the beginning of time. And so Satan doesn't change his playbook. He doesn't change his plans. These things are ancient. You know, you think you're fighting abortion, you think you're fighting these things, but you're fighting spirituality. You're fighting concepts that the fallen angels taught mankind. And so you're fighting, and that's why the word says the weapons of our warfare are not, not carnal. They're not, flesh and blood. It's these principalities and these things that were here from the beginning of time. And what they taught us to do, we're still doing today. And that's how people are led away from God. I just wanted to read, you can go and read the description of the angels and what they taught mankind. I gave you a little bit of a summary, but I wanted to read, and excuse me, I don't know how to pronounce a lot of these words, but in terms of abortion, I just thought that this was interesting. It says the fifth was Casdea. This is he who showed the Yaldeam all of the evil strikings of unclean Rachim and the demonic entities. He showed them the dashing of the embryo in the womb so that it would die. Enoch chapter 69. Next, the book of Enoch explains these angels or watchers began to mix the DNA of animals and mankind together, stating, quote, "Then they took wives, each choosing for himself, whom they began to approach, and with whom they cohabited, teaching them sorcery, incantations, and dividing of the roots and the trees. And the women conceiving brought forth giants, whose stature was each 300 cubits, who devoured all which the labor of men produced until it became impossible to feed them, when they turned themselves against men in order to devour them, and began to injure birds, beasts, reptiles, fishes, to eat their flesh of one another and to drink their blood. Then the earth reproved the unrighteous." So it gives an account of the mixing. It wasn't just this perversion between man and, angelic beings. Then they started to mix themselves with the birds, the animals, and things like that. So I wanted to mention that. And then additionally, the book of Jasher confirms this story, describing that the angels began to mix one species with another and taught man how to do so. So the book of Jasher explains that as well. Interestingly, today in laboratories all over the world, scientists are doing the exact same thing, mixing beasts and animals together. If you study the transhumanist movement, this is something that they are working on. They think they're very close to doing, and it's done all over the world in laboratories. Some of it's revealed to us, some of it's not. But, again, if you really grasp what's going on here, the mixing of angelic being, you could think of something far away in a far galaxy coming to Earth, mixing themselves with man, supposedly enlightening them with all of these, perversions, all of these psychedelic drugs and magic and sorcery and, root cutting and different things that they can do with plants to drugs, everything that lures people away from God, everything that, that TV, Hollywood, everything that encourages, kids to do, people who backslide. It's all things that the fallen angels, taught mankind. So, I like to understand the root. What is the root cause? We could say, oh, it's sin, and oh, it's, it's Satan and all this kind of stuff. And that's true. But what is the root? Where did this stuff come from? It came from the beginning of time when Adam and Eve fell and Satan tempted them in the garden, and the angels followed Satan, and then they taught man these things, and these things are still going on today. I really want to nail that point home. So not only does Enoch account of this, Jasher accounts of this. Could this be one of the things that is meant by, and so shall it be in the days of Noah, or as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of man. I want to point out that Clement, a man close to the Apostle Paul, I think Paul was his mentor. Clement believed the book of Enoch was inspired scripture and actually quoted Enoch in his writings. And he was one of the main, people who really, was establishing the church, back in his day. So there's a lot of history here. I don't want to go too long, but there's a lot of history here. If you study Enoch, if you study the people that actually quoted it, it's quoted in the Bible. Some even say it's been quoted by Jesus in the Bible as well. I wanted to briefly mention the book of Jubilees. The book of Jubilees is considered Little Genesis. So it actually goes through the Genesis book, and it pretty much gives the same account in Genesis. But every now and then you run across a sentence or a paragraph, again, that expands on a concept that was written in Genesis. A linking. So again, a historical context that can add context, that can add, add to, what Genesis is saying. And I don't mean add in terms of changing it. I mean add in terms of expanding on what was just said. So when you're reading Genesis, you could compare it to the book of Jubilees and take the same sentence that's in Jubilees, but it explains things further. One of the things that really stood out to me in the book of Genesis is, everybody is fascinated and studying the Sumerians, because the Sumerians are the first generation that was created after the first generation after the flood. And so everybody's very fascinated and studying the Sumerians. And I'm going to do a video on this, later, that goes into more Abraham and his father and where they came from. But it's historical. So it gives some context and insight into the first ancient civilization that was studied by historians all over the world, because that's the first recorded civilization, because everything was wiped from the flood. So the flood came because of what I just read to you in the book of Enoch and Jasher. That's why the flood came, was to destroy all the perversion, because it says that nobody was a pure human anymore. Noah and his family were the only ones perfect in their generations. Generations means genetics, if you look up that word. So God literally had to preserve Noah and destroy everything else because of the coming Messiah, because he needed to preserve and keep separate a people that would follow him and follow the Lord, so that he could bring the coming Messiah to save mankind. So this mixing of the DNA, it's coming back again. We're seeing it, in science laboratories all over the world. We're seeing an uprise in paganism. People say the world's turning more secular. I say it's turning more pagan. We are seeing just the reestablishing of Nimrod, one world government, the building of cities, sorcery, the worshiping of other gods, people being lured into thinking that they're their own God, and that we're all on a spiritual journey into enlightenment. Literally, all of this was done from the fallen angels, from Adam and Eve, from after the flood, Nimrod establishing it with his followers. And then that goes into the story of Abraham, and I'll do another video on that. But I just want people to understand that these kinds of concepts, you think like, oh, these make sense. And, this comes from Hinduism, Buddhism, Middle Eastern practices, all of these different cultures, they and how ancient they are. And this must be the true religion, or this must be, what life's about. But where did they get it? Where did the ancient civilizations, where did they get it? Where did this stuff come from? They all tell the story of beings coming from heaven, coming to earth, teaching mankind wisdom, and then producing their own offspring, which became the gods and the goddesses that everybody worshiped. So if you could understand the root cause and understand what is really going on, I think it would help you not be deceived. You're not worshiping the moon god and the sun god and all of these different gods that these ancient civilizations worshipped. You are worshiping a demon. You're worshiping an offspring of what these fallen angels taught mankind. So people will be in these religions and they don't believe in God or Satan. Okay, but they still tell the same story that was told in Enoch. So if you're going to believe their story, their version of the story, well, you need to expand to the Bible and to the book of Enoch and Jasher and Jubilees, and get more context and really understand that whether you believe in Satan or not, whether you think that you're worshiping him or not, you think you're a good person, this and that, and you have a good heart about it, and that's fine. I'm not saying that you're a bad person, but what I'm saying is you're deceived, because these things didn't come from an ancient religion, from the moon god or the sun god. These things were birthed out of an evil intention to destroy mankind, and that's the concept that I really want to get through to people today. So my next video will be on the flood, and then what happened after the flood with Nimrod and Abraham, and it's really fascinating. Again, a lot of great history, and it explains a lot of Babylon, one world government, pretty much the start of all the occult ancient religions is found there, and I think it'll be really interesting.